Some strategic and tactical considerations for global inventory management. Changing gears just a little bit. And we want to have this conversation within the context of a very important decision that we'll talk about throughout this, mentioned it a little bit already, but talk about it throughout this module. And that is, to what level are we operating in an outsourced model? Are we doing outsourced manufacturing? Are we buying from third-party vendors? Is our inventory being managed perhaps by a third-party logistics company? So these strategic and tactical considerations are taken within the context of those equally important decisions as well. But let's have a look at some of these key points here. Well, one of the first things we talk about in previous modules was looking at that 30,000 foot level, strategic decisions, financial decisions, marketing strategies. That's what we're talking about here. You'll recall that graphic that we saw on several occasions. One of those key top line decisions or top level decisions is the total dollar investment in global inventories. Our context is always international. It's always from a global viewpoint, and there are going to be certain constraints within our business that limit our ability to invest in inventories around the world. The biggest one, obviously, being the financial constraint. There's just a certain amount of money that can be invested in inventory, so what's our total dollar investment going to be? Bullet point number 2 influences number 1 in that the number and type of stock keeping units, the identifier of finished goods, or part numbers for raw materials and or accessories, how much and what type are we going to carry, and then ultimately where. But needless to say, the more SKUs we carry, the more part numbers we carry, the greater the investment potentially in global inventories. So how many SKUs, how many part numbers, a very important consideration. That has to be decided upon prior to getting to a tactical level. Number 3, or bullet point 3, how about the location of distribution centers, warehouses, and or satellite operations? We saw this in our module on distribution requirements planning, and to a certain extent on the MRP side of things as well. But the decisions we make to accommodate our needs in Europe, Western Europe versus Eastern Europe, to accommodate our needs in a huge country like China or India, or all of Latin America. Where do we put a distribution center? Are we going to use warehouses? Are we going to even have small satellite operations? We have to have a very clear understanding, both strategically and tactically, as to how that's going to work. Whether we run our own logistics network or we outsource to a third-party logistics company. Final bullet point on this slide, very, very important, is risk management, specific to inventories and the policies and procedures that go along with that. How do we avoid loss or damage to goods? What are our insurance policies? Things of this nature. So that's an entire subject in and of itself, but risk management, as it relates mainly to risk of loss or damage to goods, to inventory, must be established from both a policy and a procedural perspective. I mentioned this a moment ago, but a big, important strategic decision is, are we going to manage inventory ourselves or through a third-party logistics company? Now, we're not here to promote either scenario, but a clear trend in business today, globally, is the outsourcing of inventory and or logistics management through third-party logistics companies. We'll talk some more about that a little bit later on, but from the very beginning, we as an organization, again, have to decide, are we going to do this ourselves? Are we going to engage in a third party, or might it be a combination of the two? That's not unusual either. Another key point, this whole issue of visibility and tactical management of our inventory activities, systems integration, meaning our own enterprise resource planning system with perhaps the inventory management system of a third party, or a warehouse management system of a third party of our own. to have visibility into what we have in warehouses around the world. Can we accommodate orders in a given lead time for customers? You have to have that visibility, obviously. And then in that dynamic inventory environment, how about a TMS, a transportation management system that allows us to manage the physical movement of goods and have that visibility that I alluded to just a second ago. And then the third point, without going into too much detail, it's a little beyond the scope of this conversation, but what are our accounting principles? How are we going to value inventory? Are we going to use, for example, first in, first out accounting principles to manage our inventory, or last in, first out principles? So there's an accounting, a financial component as it relates to strategic and tactical considerations that must be in place as well. Mainly around how are we going to value merchandise, particularly as merchandise has a tendency to age and become sometimes even obsolete or unsellable.